On New Year's Eve, 2 masked men kicked in my front door while my son stood 10 feet away and watched me get robbed in my own living room. That part is easy to say. The harder part is what happened after. Because when I left that night, I didn't just disappear. I took everything back. Every gift, every favor, every dollar, every temporary allowance that turned permanent, every item I ever carried into that house to make their lives easier. And the best part? They didn't even realize what was happening until the moment they tried to turn the key in the lock and found out the house had stopped belonging to them in every way that mattered. I am 71 years old. I have 3 grandchildren. I have arthritis in my hands and a quiet kind of patience that people mistake for weakness. On New Year's Eve, my son learned what that mistake costs. The day started with a gray sky and the kind of cold that crawls under your collar and sits there. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Porches were decorated with cheap string lights, and people were already setting up folding tables and coolers like the night was going to be all laughter and fireworks. In my kitchen, my daughter-in-law Marissa was slicing limes for drinks she wouldn't offer me. My son, Eric, sat at my table scrolling his phone like the world could burn down around him, and he would only look up if the ash got on his screen. "Dad, we're having a few people over," he said without meeting my eyes. "Just to ring in the new year. My house, my mortgage paid off 10 years ago. My wife's photo still on the mantel because I hadn't moved it since the day I buried her. But he said it like he was letting me stay." "How many is a few?" I asked. Marissa's knife stopped. She looked at me with that practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Enough," she said. "It'll be loud. Maybe you want to stay in your room tonight." My room. That's what it had become to them over the last 2 years. Not my bedroom. Not my home. A room. Like I was a guest. Like I was something they tolerated because the paperwork wasn't finished. 2 years ago, when my wife Helen died, I thought I was doing the right thing. Eric came to me with red eyes and a trembling voice, saying he and Marissa were drowning. Rent was too high. They couldn't save. Their credit was struggling. They were doing everything they could. I remember standing in the garage that afternoon, looking at Eric's face and seeing the boy who used to sit on my shoulders at the county fair. "Move in," I told him. "Get on your feet." It was supposed to be 6 months. 6 months turned into a year. Then another. Then Marissa started calling contractors for updates. New paint, new furniture, new rules. Then she stopped saying thank you. Then she stopped pretending. I should have drawn the line long before New Year's Eve, but a widower with grandkids will swallow a lot of disrespect if it means he gets to hear little feet running through the hallway on Saturday mornings. That's what they used against me. The guests arrived just after 7. A dozen of them at least. Loud voices, expensive perfume, the smell of liquor and entitlement. They didn't greet me. They walked past me like I was a coat rack. I stood in my own living room and watched a man I didn't recognize lean his elbow on the bookshelf Helen and I built together. Marissa had music playing. The bass rattled my ribs. Eric poured drinks like he owned the place. I went to the den and sat in my chair, the old brown one with the worn armrests. I kept the television low, more for the comfort of sound than anything else. The clock moved slowly. My hands ached. My mind wandered the way it does at my age, slipping into memories I didn't ask for. Helen laughing in this very room. Helen turning the Christmas lights on and clapping her hands like a child. Helen leaning into me at midnight on New Year's Eve and whispering that she hoped we got 10 more. We didn't. Around 11:30, Marissa came into the den holding 2 plastic champagne flutes. "Dad," she said like she was being generous, "come do a toast with everyone." I looked at the flutes. They weren't for me. They were for appearance, for pictures. I knew that look. After Helen died, people looked at me like that at the funeral, like my grief was something they could arrange for the right angle. "I'm fine here," I said. Her smile tightened. Eric appeared behind her, and for a moment I thought he might say something kind, something like, "Come on, Dad, be with us." Instead, he said, "Just do it. It's 1 minute. 1 minute." That's what it always was with them. 1 minute here, one signature there, one small compromise that turned into a permanent loss. I stood up. My knees complained. My back locked for a second, and I had to steady myself on the armrest. Marissa watched that with interest. Not concern. Interest. Like she was measuring how close I was to being disposable. We walked into the living room, and people made space the way you make space for an inconvenience. Phones came out. Smiles appeared. Eric raised his flute. "To new beginnings," he said. Marissa put her hand on his arm like she was the one who had built him. Like she owned him. I lifted my empty plastic flute and stared at the face of my son. New beginnings. I didn't know how literal that was going to become in less than 30 minutes. At 11:58, the front doorbell rang. It cut through the music like a knife. Marissa frowned. "Who's that?" Eric glanced at the door, then at his phone. Something in his face shifted. A flicker of calculation. "I'll get it," he said quickly. He moved too fast. I watched him reach the door, open it, and step back like he expected what came next. 2 men pushed inside. They wore dark hoodies and masks. Their hands were gloved. One of them had a long, heavy flashlight in his fist like a weapon. At first, the guests laughed, thinking it was a prank. Then the taller one swung the flashlight into the side table by the door. Wood cracked. Glass shattered. The sound snapped something in the room. People screamed. Someone dropped a phone. "Down!" the taller one barked. "Everyone down now!" The other man locked the door behind them and turned the deadbolt with a calm, practiced movement. My heart didn't race the way you'd think. It went cold. Like my body knew before my mind did that this wasn't random. The taller man walked into the center of the room and pointed the flashlight at faces like he was counting them. His beam landed on me. "You," he said. "Old man, stand up." I was already standing, frozen beside the couch. Eric was 10 feet away. My son. My only son. His eyes were wide, mouth slightly open. He didn't move. The thief walked straight to me and shoved the flashlight into my chest, hard enough to knock the air out of my lungs. "Where's the safe?" he hissed. For a second, I didn't understand. Then I did. They didn't want televisions. They didn't want jewelry off the guests. They wanted something specific. My safe. The one in my bedroom closet behind Helen's old coats. The one that held the deed, the insurance papers, the spare keys, the family documents, and the cash I kept because I grew up in a time when you didn't trust banks with everything. I looked at Eric. He was staring at the floor like a teenager caught sneaking out. I saw Marissa behind him, pale, hand over her mouth, but her eyes weren't shocked. They were focused, like she was watching a plan unfold. The thief shoved me again. "Now!" "I'm not taking you anywhere," I rasped. He grabbed the front of my sweater and dragged me toward the hallway. My heels scraped the floor. Guests screamed and scattered. Someone tried to run, and the second man slammed them into the wall hard enough that I heard teeth click. My body moved on instinct. Old instincts. Marine Corps instincts from decades ago that never truly leave your bones. Don't fight what you can't win. Watch. Listen. Remember. They dragged me down the hallway, past framed photos of my grandchildren, past the bathroom where my wife once curled her hair, past the bedroom Marissa and Eric had taken for themselves, as if my marriage was an inconvenience they could relocate. They shoved me into my own bedroom. The thief yanked open drawers, throwing clothes onto the floor. He didn't search like a burglar. He went straight to the closet, straight to the back, straight to the safe, as if he'd measured the distance before, as if he'd been there. My mouth went dry. The thief pulled a key from his pocket, a key I had never given to anyone except Eric. He inserted it into the safe and turned it. The lock clicked. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like my organs shifted. Eric's key. The thief swung the safe door open and started pulling out folders. Deed. Titles. Insurance papers. My cash envelope. Helen's jewelry box. My wife's wedding ring, which I couldn't bear to wear myself, so I kept it protected like a relic. The thief stuffed it all into a duffel bag. He moved with familiarity. He knew what mattered. The second man came in and grabbed me by the shoulder, spinning me toward the wall. "Face it," he said. "Hands behind your back." I didn't resist. If I resisted, they'd hurt me. If they hurt me, Eric would pretend to cry later, while Marissa called it a tragedy. The man zip-tied my wrists. Then, before he left, he leaned close and spoke softly enough that only I could hear. "Happy New Year, Grandpa." Grandpa. That wasn't a thief's word. That was a family word. My blood turned to ice. They left me there on my knees, hands tied, breathing shallow. I heard footsteps running, guests screaming, a car engine roaring to life. Then silence. When I finally twisted enough to see through the doorway, I saw Eric standing in the hallway. He stared at me like he was watching a stranger suffer. "Dad," he said quietly. That was it. No rushing to cut my hands free. No shouting for help. No anger. Just Dad, like he was practicing the tone he'd use when the police arrived. Marissa appeared behind him. She looked at the open safe, the empty shelves, the scattered clothes. Then she looked at me, and I watched her do something that told me everything. She exhaled, not in fear, in relief. Eric crouched and cut the zip ties with shaking hands. He didn't meet my eyes. "We need to call 911, he said. I flexed my wrists. The plastic had bitten into my skin. "Call," I said. He hesitated. That hesitation was the second knife. Marissa put a hand on his shoulder. "The guests are upset," she murmured. We should get everyone out first." "Call," I repeated, louder. Eric swallowed. Okay. He pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. Then his phone buzzed. A text. His eyes flicked down, and I saw the color drain from his face. He glanced at Marissa. She gave him a look that said, "Not here, not in front of him." I didn't need to see the message. I didn't need to hear it. I had already seen the key. I had already heard Grandpa. I had already watched my son hesitate to call for help. The robbery wasn't the crime. The robbery was the cover. At 12:05, fireworks started popping outside like the world was celebrating something. I stood in my wrecked bedroom, breathing in slow, careful pulls, and I understood something I wish I'd understood earlier. They weren't trying to steal from me. They were trying to erase me. I went into the kitchen while Eric made a loud, theatrical 911 call in the living room. I opened a drawer and pulled out a roll of paper towels to wipe the blood from where the zip ties had broken my skin. In the drawer beneath the towels, I found Marissa's folder. She kept everything in folders. Medical bills, school records, forms. I slid it out without thinking. Inside, among the paperwork, was a document with my name on it. Not a bill, not a letter. A facility brochure. Assisted living. Memory care. Special rates for early admission. My throat tightened. I turned the page. A checklist. Insurance. Power of attorney. Medical directives. And, clipped to the back, a handwritten note in Marissa's sharp, neat writing. After New Year's, push harder. He is getting stubborn. Eric needs to stop feeling guilty. My hands went steady. That's the thing people don't understand about men my age. We've been through enough that when the world finally shows us its teeth, we don't panic. We get quiet. The police arrived. They walked through my house, asked questions, looked at the broken table, the empty safe. Eric played his part. Shaky voice, worried eyes. A son trying to protect his father. Marissa cried at the right moments. She held my arm as if she'd been the one zip-tied. The guests backed up their stories, half of them drunk and terrified, None of them, knowing what mattered, had already left the house in a duffel bag. A young officer asked me what they took. I listed it calmly. He wrote it down. Then he asked, "Do you have any suspects?" I looked at my son. Eric's eyes widened just slightly. Marissa squeezed his hand. I thought about saying it right there, about ending it with one sentence and watching the handcuffs snap shut. But I didn't, not yet, because I didn't want them arrested for what they stole. I wanted them ruined for what they thought they could do to me. So I shook my head. "No," I said. "No suspects." Eric exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. The officers eventually left. They told me they'd look for fingerprints. They told me to call if I remembered anything else. Eric offered to sleep on the couch in case the thieves come back. Marissa insisted I should take a sedative and rest. I smiled at both of them and said, "I'm fine." Then, around 2 in the morning, when the house finally fell silent and the last guest's taillights disappeared down the street, I did what I've done my whole life when something breaks. I inspected the system. I went to the front door and looked at the deadbolt. No damage. They didn't kick it in. Not really. They staged the sound with the table. They came in clean, with a key. Then I walked down to the hallway closet where I kept the router. I pulled it forward and checked the small black box mounted behind it. A camera. Not one Eric knew about. Not one Marissa knew about. I installed it the year Helen got sick. Not because I didn't trust my family. Because when you've been alive long enough, you learn the world doesn't care what you deserve. The camera's tiny light blinked. It had recorded everything from the moment Eric opened the door. I took the memory card out and slid it into my pocket. Then I went to the garage. The garage was my sanctuary. Tools organized, shelves labeled, a place that still felt like mine. In the back, beneath a tarp, was an old metal footlocker. Inside it was another folder. A folder Helen once called my paranoid folder. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. In it were copies of everything important. Backup deed paperwork, backup insurance, a spare set of keys, a list of serial numbers for every major purchase I'd ever made, titles, receipts, gift letters, loan agreements. I wasn't rich, but I was careful. And I'd never transferred the house to Eric. Not once. Marissa had been trying to get me to. "Just put it in Eric's name now," she'd say. "It'll be easier when I die." I always said no. And because I said no, everything they were doing had a weakness. At 3:30 in the morning, with fireworks ash still drifting outside, I sat at my workbench and made a list. Not of what was stolen, of what I had given. Because if they wanted to treat me like a dead man walking, then I was going to show them what a living man can take away. First on the list was the obvious. My house, my home, the roof over their heads. But there were other things. Eric's truck, the one I co-signed because his credit was temporary bad. Marissa's SUV, the one I put the down payment on because the baby needs a safe car. Their phone plan, their insurance. The credit card I kept in my name that they used for groceries and pretending. The family account I opened to help them save. The storage unit I paid for because they had too many things. The furniture in my living room that Marissa claimed was hers because she picked the fabric. Most of it was mine. And the part that wasn't mine, it had been purchased with money I gave them. Gifts have a funny thing about them. People think once they take them, they own them forever. But there's ownership, and there's control. And control is what I still had. At 4 in the morning, I walked back inside, stepped into my bedroom, and looked at the empty safe. I touched the outline where Helen's jewelry box used to sit. My throat tightened for a moment, grief mixing with rage until it was hard to separate the two. Then I whispered into the quiet room, "All right." Not to anyone, to myself. A decision. At 8 a.m., Eric and Marissa were asleep. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my phone. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer first. I called my friend Hank. Hank is 69, a retired moving company owner with a bad knee and a good heart. We served together decades ago, and he still answers the phone like time doesn't matter. He picked up on the second ring. "Walt," he said. "You alive?" "Barely," I replied. Silence. Then, "What happened?" I told him in 3 sentences. Home invasion, safe cleaned out, son acting wrong. Hank didn't ask questions. He didn't offer pity. He said, "You want your stuff moved?" "I want everything moved," I said. "Everything that's mine." "How fast?" "Today." A pause. Then Hank said, "Give me an address and don't hang up until I write it down." By 9:30, Hank's men were rolling up in a plain white truck. No logo, no questions. I met them in the driveway wearing my old work jacket and a calm expression. Eric came out rubbing his eyes confused. "Dad? What's this?" I looked at him and my voice stayed even. "I'm reorganizing," I said. Marissa stepped onto the porch behind him, arms crossed. "You can't just—" I raised a hand, not aggressive, just final. "I can," I said, "and I am." Hank climbed out of the truck and walked up beside me, clipboard in hand like this was any other job. Eric blinked at him. "Who's that?" "A mover," I said. "A professional." Marissa's eyes narrowed. "Are you moving out?" I let that hang for a second, because the truth was I already had. Not physically, mentally. The moment I saw my key in a thief's hand, something in me packed its bags and left. "I'm moving what's mine," I said. Eric's voice tightened. "Dad, we need to talk." "We can talk after," I said. "Stand aside." Hank's men went to the garage first. They didn't touch Eric's toolboxes. They didn't touch Marissa's holiday decorations. They went straight to my shelves. My ladder, my power tools, my compressor. The items Eric had been borrowing for months and never returning. Marissa followed them like a guard dog. "Those are Eric's," she snapped. Hank's man, a thick-armed guy named Reuben, looked at me. I nodded. Reuben said, "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my folder. Receipts, serial numbers, warranty cards. I handed them over. Marissa's face changed. Anger to confusion to something sharper. Eric stepped closer to me. "Dad, what are you doing?" I looked him in the eye. "I'm making sure I don't end up in a home because you got tired of waiting," I said quietly. His face went white. Marissa's mouth opened, then closed. Then she laughed, forced and thin. "That is ridiculous." I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I simply turned and walked into the house. The movers followed. They took the living room furniture first, not the cheap side tables Marissa picked up last month. My chair, the one Helen bought me for our anniversary. The couch Helen and I sat on together on quiet nights. The bookshelves. The television I paid for. Marissa stood in the doorway sputtering, "You can't take that. That's where the kids sit." I nodded toward the dining room. "There are chairs," I said. She stepped toward me, eyes blazing. "This is our home." And for a moment I almost smiled. Because that sentence told me she still didn't understand. Ownership isn't a feeling. It's paperwork. And my paperwork was in my folder, not in her fantasies. Around noon, Hank's men had stripped my house of everything that belonged to me. It was shocking how much space opened up when you removed the backbone of a household. The walls looked bare. The rooms looked smaller. Eric looked lost. Marissa looked furious. They kept saying words like illegal and theft and you can't. But none of it landed because I wasn't yelling. I wasn't dramatic. I was simply reclaiming what had always been mine. At 1 p.m., I went to the driveway and opened the glove box of Eric's truck. Inside was the insurance card. My name. because I'd kept it that way, because it was one more thing I never fully handed over. I took the card and put it in my pocket. Then I took my spare key and handed it to Hank. "Hank," I said, "take the truck too." Eric's head snapped up. "What?" I looked at him. "I co-signed. I can take it." His voice cracked. "Dad, you can't just take my truck." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You watched them zip-tie me in my own bedroom," I said. "You watched someone open my safe with your key." Eric flinched. Marissa stepped between us, eyes sharp. "Prove it." I didn't answer her, because I didn't need to, not yet. Hank's man climbed into the truck and started it. Eric lunged forward, then froze when Hank stepped in front of him. Hank didn't threaten him. Hank didn't touch him. He simply looked at Eric like a father looks at a son who has disappointed him beyond words. Eric stopped. The truck rolled away. Marissa screamed, "Call the police!" Eric looked at me desperate. "Dad, please." "Call them," I said. "Please do." He didn't. That was the moment I knew the truth was uglier than cowardice. Because an innocent man calls the police. A guilty man negotiates. By 2 p.m., Hank's truck was loaded. My possessions were gone. My house felt like a shell. Eric stood in the doorway, looking at the empty living room like he'd been robbed. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Marissa stood beside him, breathing hard. "Where are you going?" I paused at the threshold. "I'm going to get the rest," I said. Her brow furrowed. "The rest of what?" I looked directly at Eric. "The things you think you own because I was foolish enough to love you," I said. Then I left. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't go to a friend's couch. I went to the one place Eric had never asked about, never cared about, never considered. A small storage unit on the edge of town. Unit 114. It held things from my past. Tools I didn't use anymore. Helen's old holiday bins. Old furniture. And, in a locked metal cabinet inside the unit, the things I kept because I never fully trusted anyone, even family. A separate bank card in my name only, a second phone, and a thumb drive. The memory card from the hidden camera. I sat in my truck, plugged the drive into my old laptop, and watched my own front door open again. I watched Eric step back. I watched the two masked men enter, and then I watched the moment that made my stomach twist. Eric nodded at them. Not a terrified nod, a confirming one, like, "Yes, go." Then I watched the taller thief lean into Eric and speak. Eric answered. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I saw Eric's mouth shape something that made my skin crawl. Closet, back wall. My safe. He told them where it was like he was giving directions to a restaurant. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Then I clicked forward. I watched myself get shoved. I watched myself zip-tied. I watched Eric stand in the hallway doing nothing. I watched Marissa's relief. I watched the thief lean in and say, "Happy New Year, Grandpa." The thief's mask shifted for a second and the camera caught a sliver of skin near his cheek. A tattoo. A small black spade. I knew that tattoo. Not personally, but I knew where I'd seen it. On Eric's friend Shane. Shane, who had been between jobs for years. Shane, who always had cash. Shane, who always seemed to know people who could handle problems. I sat back and let the rage settle into something colder. Because now I didn't just have suspicion. I had proof. And with proof, you don't have to scream. You just have to pull the right strings and let people hang themselves. By 5 p.m., I had done 3 things. First, I called the bank and froze the family account. It was in my name. Eric was a secondary, a convenience I'd given him. Conveniences can be revoked. Second, I called the insurance company and removed Eric and Marissa from my policies. No more coverage under my umbrella. Let them pay their own way. Third, I called the dealership where Eric's truck was financed and informed them the vehicle was being voluntarily surrendered due to breach of agreement. Hank would drop it at the lot by morning. Eric's credit would burn. Marissa's too. Not revenge for fun, revenge for survival. Because they had planned to put me away, and a man my age doesn't get many chances to avoid being locked behind someone else's door. Around 7 p.m., I drove back to my house. Not to go inside, to watch. I parked down the street under a dead streetlight and waited. The neighborhood was still recovering from the night before. Empty bottles and trash cans. Confetti stuck to wet pavement. My house sat dark. Inside, Eric and Marissa were probably telling themselves this was temporary, that I was having a tantrum, that I'd come crawling back because I needed them. At 8:15, the front door opened. Marissa stepped out first, phone in hand, pacing. Eric followed, shoulders hunched, face tight. I watched him lift his phone to his ear. He spoke. Then he stopped walking. His posture changed, a slow stiffening. Even from a distance, I could see panic take hold. Marissa yanked the phone from his hand and listened. Her mouth opened. She started talking fast, angry, pleading. Then she threw her hands up and screamed into the night. Eric sank onto the front steps. His head dropped into his hands. I didn't need to hear the words to know what happened. They had tried to access money. Gone. They had tried to call the insurance. Gone. They had tried to get into the truck. Gone. The house was next, but I wasn't going to do it the easy way, because easy would let them paint me as a bitter old man. Easy would let them tell family, friends, and courts that I was confused. I needed it to be undeniable. So I waited until 10 when the street was quiet again. Then I walked up my own driveway. I didn't sneak. I didn't hide. I walked like a man coming home. Marissa flung the door open before I could reach it. Her eyes were wild. "What did you do?" I looked at her calmly. "I reorganized." "You stole our money," she hissed. I tilted my head. "My money." Eric appeared behind her, voice strained. "Dad, please, we can fix this." I stepped inside. The house looked wrong without my furniture. Echoes where warmth used to be. I walked to the hallway closet and opened it. I pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were legal notices. Not long-winded, not dramatic. Simple. Termination of occupancy. Notice to vacate. I didn't need a courtroom speech. I didn't need theatrics. I held out the envelope to Eric. He stared at it like it might explode. Marissa snatched it and ripped it open. Her eyes scanned the paper. Then her face twisted. "You can't evict us," she snapped. "We live here." "You live here because I allowed it," I said. "That allowance is over." Eric's voice cracked. "Dad, where are we supposed to go?" I looked at him for a long moment. In that moment, I saw flashes of the child he used to be, and then I saw the man he had become. A man who watched his father get zip-tied while strangers emptied his safe. "A place you pay for," I said. "Like adults." Marissa stepped closer, lowering her voice, trying to become reasonable. "Walter," she said, "this is emotional. Let's just calm down. Let's talk tomorrow." I looked at her. "Tomorrow is what you wrote in your checklist," I said. Her face went still. Eric's eyes snapped to her. "What?" Marissa's voice sharpened. "He's making things up." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the facility brochure and her handwritten note. I tossed it onto the kitchen table. It slid across the wood and stopped between them like a blade. Eric stared at it. His face changed slowly, like a man watching his own life collapse in real time. Marissa lunged for the note, but I put my hand down flat on it first. My hand wasn't fast, but it was steady. "You were going to put me away," I said quietly. "After you robbed me." Eric's mouth opened. No sound came out. Marissa's eyes flashed. "We did not rob you." I nodded once. "Then you won't mind watching the video." Eric's head jerked up. "What video?" I pulled out my second phone and tapped the screen. The footage began. My front door opening. Eric stepping back. The masked men entering. Eric nodding at them. Eric speaking. Marissa's hand flew to her mouth. Eric's face drained of color so quickly I thought he might faint. He whispered, "No." I let the video play until the part where the thief opened the safe with Eric's key. Then I stopped it. Silence filled the kitchen. Outside, a dog barked once and then stopped. Marissa found her voice first, shrill and furious. That's not what it looks like." I turned to Eric. "Explain it." His eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I almost felt something soften in me. Then I remembered the zip ties. He swallowed hard. "Dad, I didn't think they'd hurt you." My chest tightened. That was his defense. Not, "I didn't do it." Not, "I tried to stop them." Just, "I didn't think they'd hurt you." Marissa snapped, "He needed help. You were never going to sign the papers. You were being stubborn." Eric's voice rose, panicked. "Marissa, stop." She turned on him. "No, you told me you'd handle it." I watched them turn on each other, and I realized something that made the grief inside me feel almost clean. They weren't partners. They were predators, sharing a meal, and now the meal had teeth. I took a slow breath. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. Marissa scoffed. "You think you can just—" I lifted a finger. Not threatening, final. "I already did," I said. "You're out of my house tonight." Eric flinched. "Dad, we can't— The kids can stay," I said, and watched Marissa's eyes widen. "They can stay with me. You two can go." Marissa's face twisted. "You can't take my children." I looked at her, voice calm. "I'm not taking them," I said. "I'm keeping them safe in the home I own, the home you tried to steal." Eric whispered, "Dad, please." I stepped closer to him, close enough to see the fear and shame and something darker. "You saw me get robbed," I said. "You watched it, and you did nothing." He started to cry. The sound didn't move me the way it would have a year ago, because tears don't erase zip ties. I turned and walked to the front door. I opened it. Cold air rushed in. I looked back at them one last time. "I'm giving you 20 minutes to pack," I said. "If you're still here after that, I make the next call." Marissa's voice shook with rage. "To who?" I met her eyes. "The police," I said. "And unlike last night, I'll have names." I stepped outside and stood on my porch listening. Inside, the house erupted. Marissa yelling, Eric pleading, drawers opening, a suitcase dragged across the floor. At minute 19, the front door flew open. Marissa stormed out first, dragging a bag, eyes full of hate. Eric followed with his shoulders hunched, face wet. The grandchildren peeked from behind the hallway corner, confused and scared. I crouched and opened my arms. They ran to me. Their small bodies hit my chest, and for a moment, the rage inside me tightened into something else, something protective. Marissa stopped at the end of the driveway and turned. "This isn't over," she spat. I nodded once. "You're right," I said. "It isn't." They drove away, and as their taillights disappeared down the street, I walked back into my house and shut the door. Then I made the call. Not to the police first, to the one person Eric never thought about. My grandson's school counselor. Because I had seen things over the last year that I hadn't wanted to admit. The way the kids flinched when Marissa raised her voice. The way my oldest grandson tried to hide snacks in his pocket because he wasn't sure when he'd eat again. The way my granddaughter clung to me like I was the only steady thing in her life. I told the counselor what happened in plain terms. Home invasion, evidence, eviction, children staying with me. Then I called the police. This time I didn't say no suspects. This time I gave them names. Eric, Marissa, Shane. I handed over the video. I handed over my inventory list. I handed over the brochure and the note. And then I sat at my kitchen table, in my empty house, with 3 grandchildren asleep down the hall, and I waited. The next day was not quiet. Police cars came. Questions came. Eric called me 14 times. Marissa left voicemails full of threats that turned into pleading halfway through. By evening, Shane was picked up on an outstanding warrant from another county. That's how those men live. They never have just one crime. Shane talked, not because he was remorseful, because he was selfish. He told them Eric paid him. He told them Marissa planned it. He told them about the key. He told them the grandpa line was Marissa's idea, a joke. A cruel little joke designed to make me feel small. I listened to the detective repeat those words to me, and my hands stayed steady. Because by then, I wasn't living in shock. I was living in clarity. Eric was arrested 2 days later. Not in my driveway. Not in a dramatic chase. In the parking lot of a cheap motel where he'd been hiding because Marissa had thrown him out the moment the pressure hit. That's what happens when you build a life on betrayal. The foundation collapses the second the weight gets real. Marissa tried to play victim. She tried to say I was abusive, controlling, confused, senile. But she had underestimated one thing. I had been quiet for years. Quiet men observe. Quiet men document. Quiet men keep receipts. And quiet men install cameras when they see the first crack in the wall. Within a week, I had emergency temporary custody of my grandchildren. Not because I begged, because the evidence was undeniable. Because the home invasion wasn't just theft. It was a conspiracy. And a judge doesn't like conspiracies involving elderly parents and planned assisted living admissions. The day the custody order came through, I walked into my living room and sat in my chair. Not the old one. That had been moved to Hank's warehouse and would come back once I finished repairing what they'd damaged. I sat in a folding chair in an empty room, and I still felt richer than Eric had ever been. Because the house was quiet again. Not empty. Quiet. My grandchildren colored at the kitchen table. A pot of soup simmered on the stove. The wind brushed the windows. And for the first time since Helen died, my home felt like mine. On the next New Year's Eve, 1 year later, I stood on my porch with my oldest grandson beside me. Fireworks bloomed over the neighborhood, bright and loud and careless. He looked up at me and asked, "Grandpa, are the bad guys coming back?" I knelt slowly, joints stiff, and put my hand on his shoulder. "No," I said. "Not here. Not anymore." He nodded like he believed me, and I did too. Because the truth is, I didn't just take my things back. I took my life back. Eric thought robbing me would make him powerful. Marissa thought humiliating me would make her safe. They were wrong. All they did was remind an old man of something he had forgotten in his grief. A home is not just walls and furniture. A home is authority. And when you try to steal authority from the man who built it, you better be sure he has nothing left to lose. Because if he does, he will leave. He will take everything back. And you will not even realize you're drowning until you open your wallet and find nothing inside except the echo of your own betrayal.